If you've spent any time learning about investing, you've probably heard the same advice over and over again. Just buy an ETF. Financial experts recommend them. Millionaires invest in them. Even Warren Buffett has suggested that for many people, a low-cost index fund is a sensible, long-term choice. But here's the strange part. Most people who buy ETFs couldn't explain what one actually is. It's easy to think an ETF is just another stock. After all, you buy it the same way. You type a ticker symbol into your brokerage account, press buy, and it appears in your portfolio. But unlike Apple or Microsoft, an ETF isn't a single company. So what exactly are you owning? The easiest way to understand it is to forget about investing for a moment. Imagine walking into a grocery store because you want fruit. You could buy one apple, or one orange, or one banana. But there's another option. You could buy a fruit basket that already contains dozens of different fruits. Instead of relying on a single piece of fruit, you've instantly created variety. If one apple goes bad, the entire basket isn't ruined. An ETF works in a very similar way. Instead of buying shares in just one company, you're buying a single investment that can hold dozens, hundreds, or even thousands of different companies at once. That means one purchase can give you ownership in businesses across technology, healthcare, banking, manufacturing, and many other industries. It's one investment with many businesses inside it. But that leads to an obvious question. If an ETF can contain hundreds of companies, who decides what's inside it? And how can you buy hundreds of stocks with just one click? That's where ETFs become far more clever than most people realize. So who decides which companies go into an ETF? The answer depends on the ETF you're buying. Every ETF is managed by an investment company, such as Vanguard, BlackRock, or State Street. Their job is to create a fund with a specific objective. For example, one ETF might aim to track the S&P 500, which is an index made up of 500 of the largest publicly traded companies in the United States. Rather than trying to beat the market, the fund simply aims to mirror it. If Apple makes up about 7% of the index, then roughly 7% of the ETF is invested in Apple. If Microsoft represents 6%, the ETF holds around 6% in Microsoft. The same principle applies to the other companies in the index. As those percentages change over time, the fund adjusts its holdings to stay aligned with the index. This means you don't have to research hundreds of companies yourself. Buying one share of the ETF gives you exposure to all the companies it owns. Let's put that into perspective. Imagine you wanted to build your own version of the S&P 500. You'd have to buy shares in 500 different companies. You'd need to decide how much money to put into each one. Then you'd have to keep adjusting your portfolio whenever the index changed. For most investors, that would be expensive, time-consuming, and nearly impossible to maintain. An ETF does all of that work for you. You buy one investment, and the fund takes care of the rest. Of course, that service isn't completely free. Every ETF charges a small annual fee called an expense ratio. It's usually expressed as a percentage of the money you have invested. For many broad market index ETFs, that fee is extremely low, often just a few dollars per year for every $10,000 invested. The fee is automatically reflected in the fund's performance, so you won't see a separate bill arrive. This is one of the reasons low-cost ETFs have become so popular. They give ordinary investors access to a professionally managed, diversified portfolio without requiring a large amount of money or constant attention. But there's one important question left. If an ETF already owns hundreds of companies, why do some ETFs perform incredibly well while others struggle? The answer comes down to what they choose to own, not simply how many companies they hold. At this point, you might be thinking, if ETFs own lots of companies, shouldn't they all perform about the same? Not quite. The performance of an ETF depends entirely on what it owns. Let's compare two examples. One ETF tracks the S&P 500. That means it owns shares in companies like Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, NVIDIA, and hundreds of other large US businesses across many industries. Another ETF invests only in clean energy companies. It might own just 30 or 40 businesses, all operating in the same sector. Both are ETFs. But they're taking very different approaches. If technology companies have a strong year, an S&P 500 ETF may perform well because technology makes up a significant portion of the index. If the clean energy industry struggles, a clean energy ETF could fall sharply, even if the overall stock market is doing well. That's why the letters ETF don't tell you whether an investment is good or bad. They only describe how the investment is packaged. You still need to understand what's inside the package. Think of it like ordering a mystery box online. Every box arrives in the same type of packaging, but what's inside could be completely different. One might contain electronics, and another could contain books, and another might contain clothes. The box isn't what matters. The contents are. The same is true for ETFs. Some track the world's largest companies. Some focus on a single country. Others invest only in healthcare, artificial intelligence, real estate, bonds, or even gold. That's why experienced investors usually look beyond the ETF's name. Before investing, they ask questions like, what does this ETF actually own? How diversified is it? What is its annual expense ratio? Does it match my long-term goals? These questions matter far more than whether the investment is simply called an ETF. Because choosing an ETF isn't really about choosing a product, it's about choosing the collection of businesses or assets you want to own for years to come. And that leads to the final question. If ETFs make investing so simple, why doesn't everyone just put all of their money into one? By now you know what an ETF is. You know it can hold hundreds or even thousands of investments inside a single fund. So that raises one final question. If ETFs are so diversified, why doesn't everyone invest in them? The truth is, many people do. Over the past 2 decades, trillions of dollars have flowed into ETFs because they solve a problem that has challenged investors for generations. Picking winning stocks is incredibly difficult. Think about it. If you buy shares in just one company, your future depends heavily on that business. If it grows, your investment may do very well. If it struggles, your portfolio could suffer. An ETF spreads that risk across many companies. Instead of relying on one business to succeed, you're investing in an entire group of businesses. That doesn't eliminate risk. If the overall market falls, a broad market ETF will usually fall too. The difference is that you're no longer depending on a single company getting everything right. For many long-term investors, that's a trade-off worth making. This is also why you'll often hear the phrase, don't put all your eggs in one basket. An ETF is one of the simplest ways to follow that advice. Of course, ETFs aren't perfect. A broad market ETF is unlikely to turn a few $1,000s into millions overnight. It isn't designed to. Its goal is to deliver the performance of the market it tracks, not outperform it. That means you'll experience the market's ups and downs along the way. Some years will be excellent, others will be disappointing. The investors who benefit the most are usually the ones who understand this before they invest. They don't panic during market declines. They continue investing consistently, allowing time to do most of the heavy lifting. In many ways, that's the biggest advantage of an ETF. It doesn't promise to beat everyone else. It gives you a simple, low-cost way to participate in the long-term growth of many businesses instead of trying to predict which single company will win. So if someone tells you to buy an ETF, you'll know they're not talking about a special type of stock. They're talking about a single investment that can give you ownership in hundreds or even thousands of companies with one purchase. And that's why ETFs have become one of the most popular investment tools in the world. Not because they're exciting, but because for millions of investors, they've made building a diversified portfolio simpler than ever before.